Good morning, friends, colleagues, esteemed chair, Professor Biplab, the man behind the show, Professor Padi, the well-wishers, dear students. Uh, I'm also wondering why the organizers picked this rather uh, incomplete theme. And incompleteness can be likened to inadequacies, and inadequacies in a philosophical sense can also be read as something uh, very substantive, or rather very adequate. Uh, from a philosophical point of view, right-based inclusive society is an impossibility. Moment you bring in something like rights in a society which is not even transitional in many senses, as in the Indian case, where you have uh, contestations of feudalism, modernity within quote, postmodernity within quote, etc. These politically correct terms, in my opinion, are antithetical to. Okay, so if you look at the terms we have come to use in academia, such as Center for Inclusiveness, Center for this, that, etc. So all these are continuing the march of uh, the colonial sites, which got us the disciplines where we work. Understand? So, Utkal University or X University or Y University are patterned after the colonial sites. The first three universities in India were cultural imports into our country, and cultural imports succeed sometimes, fail many a time. In higher education, cultural import has not succeeded, in my opinion, because the agenda was conceived by somebody else with some different purposes and objectives, and we continue to work with the same agenda. Just as we have imported these disciplines, lock, stock, and barrel from University of London, after which our first three universities were model, and after which all our universities have been model. Of course, in the last 30 years, the inspirations come from North America. That's the only difference. Before 80s, the inspiration came from UK. After 90s, the collapse of Cold War, um, the inspiration comes from North America. Um, so in this context, how to engage with this theme, media margins, right-based inclusive society. Several thoughts were crossing my mind, and we can't give up the pursuit nonetheless, because as I mentioned earlier, inadequacies are to be seen as challenges to better our understanding. So any theme that gets circulated in conferences like this are not of our own making. So they have been already conceived to proceed in a particular line by those who want to control our minds, who want to control our academic pursuits, etc. For instance, um, if you look at thesis or working papers or term papers, in all the disciplines, in social sciences, I mean, you would find a term empowerment. If you pursue the journey of this term empowerment, during the last 30, 40 years, you would end up in one of the policy documents of World Bank or some think tank somewhere. So our notion of empowerment, our idea of empowerment, though is rooted in our problems, social problems, problems of women, etc., etc. We are using the lens or prism of somebody who works as part of a geopolitical apparatus, that is a multilateral forum. And this multilateral forum wants us to think our reality in a particular way. Last 10 years, 15 years, policymakers, particularly urban planners, are seized with this notion of smart city, making our city smart. I was curious who conceived this logic of smart city. Again, you end up in a document of a international think tank, or you find it in the website of World Bank or IMF. From our side, we can't help this. So we are pretty powerless as academics working in universities to change the order of geopolitical nature of communication. Communication since the first day has been the child of geopolitics, believe it or not. We are talking on this theme thanks to whatever happened as a part of geopolitical initiatives during and after Second World War. And nothing has changed. Nothing has changed in this fundamental nature of the drive. Freud only gets us two drives, death drive and pleasure drive. Okay, so from the side of communication, we should think about this geopolitical drive that sustains what we are talking, what we are thinking, how we are talking, how we are thinking. So we are helpless in a sense in only talking about what is to be talked about, what is to be written about. So that's why you find that majority of the conference papers across the world are on social media. They are not on communication and culture. Because it profits the geopolitical machinery, which also owns the apparatus that has got us social media. So we don't talk about political economy of social media, just as we talked about political economy of television, political economy of newspapers. Not that we are incapable of talking about social media's political economy, but it doesn't make any sense. It is stating the obvious that these three groups own these media, or these two guys own these media. So this is their annual net worth, etc. So talking about media or media margins should compel us to critique what is meant by media. Are we missing something when we relate to media? So again, we have to rethink what McLuhan wanted us to rethink, but unfortunately, we forgot what he said in the margins. To put it in a loaded term, what McLuhan said in the margins has been forgotten. So what he said in the margins of his lectures, of his writings, are the most substantive contribution of McLuhan. What he has said in the main is the least substantive and least important one. So these are mere catchy phrases, slogans, which we have come to read McLuhan. So we have taken literally um, uh, a slogan such as medium is a message, art and cool media, this and that. In the process, we have done great injustice to one of the great scholars of media and communication, that is McLuhan. If you read Understanding Media, you need margins. Okay, you would understand that it is not media that we have in mind, media such as television, radio, or this or that, social media, but something else. And I'm not here to explain you what he was talking about. I am only drawing your attention to uh, what are not media and what is not communication. And McLuhan was not the first to talk about this. Ancient Jain philosophers in India made some substantive contributions to our understanding of communication. And one such thread informs me that uh, communication in itself is flawed if it is going to be rooted in language structures. Any language based communication is likely to be a failure, as language is an inadequate medium of communication. This you learn from one thread of ancient Jaina philosophy in India. And media are wedded to linguistic structures. The power of Indian films is not because it uses the language of films. It's because of the fact that it uses the language of a oral culture or society. That's why in Indian films you have characters talking all the time. That's why in Indian television you have characters talking all the time. That's why in Indian news stories in print or online you have people talking all the time. Talking comes to us naturally as members of oral society. It's not a problem, but it becomes a problem when we work with media which have been given to us from outside. Media or cultural imports continue to be sites of cultural imports. That's why even after nearly 400 plus years of our existence with print, we are unable to overcome completely the power of the orality. So it continues to be a site of contestation where orality and print are struggling to exist. In such a context, where we have sites of contestations in the spheres of media, communication, and culture. Less said about culture, the better, because culture, according to Remo Williams, in his monumental work, Keywords, he opens this entry on culture like this. Culture is one of the 2 or 3 most problematic words in English. Again, our notions of culture have been given to us during the colonial period. And coloniality is not about discontinuities alone, but it is about discontinuities in knowledge seeking. discontinuities in the way we have engaged with culture or read culture differently prior to colonialism or prior to the colonial period. So culture here becomes a mainstreaming logic now. So when we speak of media cultures, we speak of television cultures, social media cultures, we try to convey the impression that culture is something reachable, accessible, or something that is within our grasp. In this mainstreaming logic, we are interpellated in imaginary relationships with these cultures, in imaginary relationships with film cultures, digital cultures, and all mediated cultures. Now, are we chasing the ideals? That's my question in this theme. Are we chasing the ideal inclusive society? And chasing ideals again would trap us in imaginary relationships. So there are so many ifs and buts. However, we need to remember that understanding media or media margins is, though problematic, would be a eventful journey for any student of communication, if only we understand in a broad canvas where these key terms which we have come to use are to be read as problematic, not because we know little about them, but because they have their own geopolitical colonial origins, firstly. So if we are teaching mass communication, we need to understand that this term is geopolitical and colonial in its origin. Secondly, if we are using culture as a prefix or suffix, then we need to understand that even in the Western Hemisphere, this term started its journey only around 18th, 19th century. I'm not saying this, Remo Williams says this in his keyword. Thirdly, more importantly, if we read somebody's work as a site of framework, say, if I'm a fan of McLuhan, yeah, fine, you can read McLuhan, you can read any X or Y, but you need to understand none of them were original. None of us are original in our thoughts. Our thoughts are always influenced by our ancestors. McLuhan was inspired by Walter Owing, who gave us this framework of orality. He was a contemporary of Owing. McLuhan was inspired by heraldiness. So to understand McLuhan, first you have to stop reading McLuhan and read Walter Owing. You have to read heraldiness and then come back to McLuhan. After McLuhan, many have critiqued McLuhan. One important person is Friedrich Hitler. So to understand McLuhan, retrospectively, you have to read Hitler. To understand Hitler, you have to read Manowik. To put all of them into dock, you have to read your native philosophy. You have to come back to a Jaina philosophy or Saiva philosophy or a Buddhist philosophy and then put them all together in a basket and weigh them differently. At the moment, we are taking a very singular, mainstreaming, hegemonic approach when we teach students about all this. And we are unfortunately living in the times where media studies are plainly mistaken as studying the media. Studying the media is not media studies. Studying communication is not communication studies. Critical studies of communication, critical studies of media are the need of the hour. And thank you for being patient. Thank you very much. Wish you all the best.